I personally believe each community had their own storytellers, and they had different storytellers for each, venue. There'd be a storyteller that would perform the legends that we know today that help shape our world and help shape us to become the human beings that we are. But there would also be historical storytellers who would keep in their memory banks, because our stories and our language, everything has been oral. It's been passed on from generation to generation, from the previous generation sharing it with the next generation. And so there were the historical storytellers would maintain in their minds, in their bodies, in their spirits, who existed in those clans, who had the traditional names. They would keep all of that information until it was time to pass it on to someone else and to the next generation. My maternity care seemed to be okay for the most part. I mean, my firstborn, I had medical issue after medical issue after medical, like throughout the entire pregnancy. But thankfully, people just knew to step up and treat me. I remember having extreme morning sickness, so-called morning sickness. I was sick day and night. I was becoming dehydrated. And I remember at one point, I had no control about my eyes. They started rolling around in my head. And that's when my now ex-husband said, what are you doing with your eyes? What's going on? I'm like, I don't know. I can't help it. And he called a taxi and we went straight to Emerge. And I was, hooked up to an IV for 3 days. And after that, I felt great. But then it was a kidney infection. Then it was an abruption on the placenta. And I almost lost the baby later on in the pregnancy. There were so many things that happened. And eventually we gave birth in Ottawa. That was fine. The second born was in Nanaimo, and he was the easiest by far. Just a few hours of labor. And I remember the doctor actually yelling at me because I was pushing, and she said, "Okay, stop pushing." And I said, "I'm not pushing." He just wanted to be born that fast. But other than that, it was really, really great. And then the third one ended up being a huge baby, 10 pounds, 3 ounces. So other than that, it was very easy peasy. Just the labor was really very hard. And that ended up being like a forceps, episiotomy, delivery. But I think today they probably wouldn't do that. They'd probably just do a C-section. But I wanted a small baby, and I had this, I don't know, felt like a month-old baby right at once. But yeah, those experiences were great. I don't know why they were great, but I feel very blessed that they were, because it could have been a lot worse. I was living on Haida Gwaii, and I was experiencing very, very heavy bleeding with my cycles. I was in the stages of perimenopause at the time, and my cycles were not stopping. And so I was referred to a gynecologist in Prince Rupert on the mainland. It's an 8-hour ferry to get there. And so I went to see this gynecologist who first really tried to push getting a complete hysterectomy, because I was having the heavy cycles, and it showed up that there was a cyst on my right ovary, and he said it was very large. And I said, "No, you're not going to take my uterus. I know I'm older, and I know I'm not going to have any children, and I don't necessarily need it, but it feels like it needs to be there. So I don't want you to remove it." And I just asserted myself, because my mother's was removed and she experienced a lot of health issues with that. And I heard of other Indigenous women where it was pushed on them and they experienced a lot of changes, completely changes your life, the hormone treatment therapy that you need afterwards and things like that. It sounded horrible. So I said, that is not for me. You are not going to do that. And I said, I want to take time to figure out something else for myself first. And so he did end up doing the ablation, though. So I did the ablation, and I remember going in, and he had to insert some kind of a special stick that was going to open up my cervix so he could actually do it. And it was extremely painful. And when I was done, it just makes me mad when I think about what he said to me. And he basically looked at me and said, and now you're not to have sex until after this is over. And I said, well, I'm not going to. My husband isn't even here with me. And then he restated his sentence, and he started grinning like it was something, he was saying something really funny. He just said, and not with your lovers either. I'm like, what? I am not going to have sex with anyone. I didn't really know what else to say at that point because I felt very vulnerable. I mean, I was lying half naked on his table, and I knew he had to treat me the next day doing this ablation. So I didn't feel like I could be firm enough and say, that was extremely inappropriate. But I think if it were me today, I would say that. That is extremely inappropriate, and I don't appreciate it. Like, why would you tell me something like that? Especially after you just hurt me with this. Why am I going to want to even? I don't know. I did not like that experience at all. And I did not like that doctor. And I heard I wasn't the only one who experienced this with that same doctor. I don't think I reported him to anyone. Maybe I shared with my doctor, but I think maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I brushed it under the rug because my experience in the past was such that no one ever listened to me before. No one ever believed me. I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. It's going to be a like, oh, well, you think you said that he said this, kind of thing. Maybe you misinterpreted it, kind of thing, because this has happened before. Well, with the previous sexual assault and the physical assault with other doctors in other parts of Canada, I didn't report those. I didn't. And I didn't feel comfortable reporting them. And I knew that I had not been believed, not by my own family doctor, in the past. I just know that no one was going to believe me, so I did not report them. I didn't report the sexual assault or the physical assault because I knew that no one was going to believe me. I knew that the only person that believed me after I was physically assaulted was the nurse. And I knew that I couldn't use her as a witness because I knew that she could potentially lose her job. I knew that the emergency room doctor had power over her. He had power over me too. He's the one, I was afraid actually that I might have to encounter him again in the future because Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories is not a huge town. It is a lot bigger than some, but sometimes you might have to go back to the same practitioner, in the future. So there was nothing I could really do about that. And the sexual assault, when my general practitioner didn't believe me when I was living in Victoria, I knew when she didn't believe me, I basically didn't have a leg to stand on. I knew without her report and her note, anything, because she called him by her first name. And she's like, oh, he wouldn't do that. He's got a wife and family. And I'm like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Really, what does it have to do with anything? This is a man who saw me as I was a very young Indigenous woman. I had just turned 31, and my hair was long and dark brown. And, I spent most of my life thinking that I was ugly, right? Because I was basically told that from a very young age by settler children at my school when I was bullied every single day from kindergarten to grade 7. When the settler children in my kindergarten classroom, it was an armed forces school, and the Canadian Armed Forces moved into our community and they built their own school, they built their own recreation center, they built their own grocery store, they built their own library. You had to be one of them in order to gain access to any of these places. They also built their own homes, built in circles, very, very much enclosed, not gated, but you definitely knew you were not welcome in those spaces. So I really hated myself. And I look back on those pictures and realize, why did I waste my time hating myself so much that I thought I was hideous, that I was that ugly? So this is a doctor who basically, he knew he had all kinds of power over me. He was my surgeon. I didn't know that I could actually stand up for myself at that time and say, you know what? I would like a second opinion from a different surgeon. I would like to see someone else besides this doctor because I don't feel comfortable with him. I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't know I could assert myself. I didn't know that if my general practitioner wasn't going to support me, that I could go and seek another practitioner who would believe me and might not be able to provide, exact things because that person might not be treating me all this time and understand fully, but I could explain, why would I lie about something like this? Why do we have to prove? Why do we have to prove ourselves so much so when the person who has done the assault is just walking around thinking that, well, I did this time, I'm just going to keep doing this. This is part of my practice. It's okay to sexually assault Indigenous women because who's going to believe them? I'm the doctor. I'm the surgeon, right? That's how it felt to me anyway.